Hello and welcome. This is Frederick John. Today we're going to be going over front-end frameworks. I think most people would agree that front-end frameworks are a good idea to work with. The debate in question arises when we're looking at the degree in which we want to incorporate frameworks in our projects. Now, I think that it's a good idea. You don't want to be typing the same HTML skeleton over and over every time you start a new project. It makes sense to have a base point where you can, start with a framework, bare bones at least, and then you could work from there. I think that where it can be an issue is some developers including a lot of components of the frameworks, but then failing to customize them or adapt them to suit their project. They just kind of copy paste what is there, and then you can immediately tell right away, oh, this person's using a Bootstrap. You can see the hero image and everything right there is very obvious to be Bootstrap, and the navigation and everything. It's just very, very standard. At that point, you're kind of abusing the framework power, but that's your prerogative, to each their own. So we're going to take a look today at, if you want to use a framework, what framework should you use? Should you bother learning every framework? Are some frameworks better than others? The answer is absolutely. There are very, very, very many front-end frameworks to choose from. In the time it takes me to record this video, a new one will probably come out. Now, which framework is the best one to use? What we want to do is objectively compare them and try to find a way where we can rate them on a scale with a weighted average and see which one has the most to offer. I think that you'll find our answer might surprise you. So without any further ado, let's jump in and see which framework is the best. So how did we rate the frameworks? What criteria did we use to determine which one would rise to the top? Well, we looked at the ease of installation, the learning curve. Is it something that looks familiar? Is it something that's going to take a little bit of time to get used to? The size of the framework. Is this something that's very robust and full of features but takes up a little bit more space, which then slows down everything? Is it something that's very, very minimal footprint? The functionality, what kind of components can you create? Are you able to create, all the main components, buttons, media queries, everything like that? Is it lacking any functionality? Ongoing developer support. Is this framework still supported by its developers? Ease of integration. Is this something that's going to easily integrate with the rest of your application? Or is this something that does not integrate very easily? That's something that you're going to want to consider. And the supporting community. If you have an issue or a problem, there's a good chance that somebody else already had that problem. If there's a large community, you might be able to go into the forums, post a question, and you might have an answer in 20 minutes. If it's a very, very obscure framework and the community is very, very small, it's no longer in development, you're going to have a much harder time finding an answer to your problem. So ongoing developer support and supporting community, they kind of go together. And one other thing that I'll throw in there that I don't think is posted is documentation. Documentation is very important when you're choosing a front-end framework, because you're going to have questions. You're going to have something come up where it's not working the way that you thought it should work or you thought it would work, and you're going to have to refer to the documentation. If the documentation is well written and there's plenty of it, it's not lacking, you're not going to have a problem. You figure out what the issue is, you make the necessary changes and move on. If the documentation is very poorly written, or it's very sparse, it's just kind of lacking in content, you might not be able to easily find an answer, and that could be very frustrating. It could slow down the development of your project, and you don't want to have that once you've already committed to using the framework and you're already inside development and you've been developing for a while. You don't want to have anything that's going to slow you down. So now you've seen the rating criteria. Let's look at calculating the U-score. Each framework is scored individually based on the criteria. The individual scores are then averaged and weighted to calculate the framework's overall utility, or U score. So this is an example here where we will calculate the relative size, relative functionality, the ongoing development of each framework that we looked at, and each one of those got a score. And then it was based on that score that we can compare them to the other frameworks. Because if you're thinking about, well, the ease of installation of a certain framework, let's take Blaze for example. How easy is Blaze to install? Well, that question really doesn't have much meaning unless you're comparing it to another framework. How easy is Blaze to install, versus Bootstrap or versus Semantic? Then you can look and say, okay, well, this one took a lot longer to install. This one had a lot more steps. That's clearly more difficult. So once you have something to compare it to, then it's much easier to give it a score. Now let's break down what we mean by functionality. The frameworks that we looked at are full front-end frameworks. That means that they have CSS and JavaScript. They have different components that you can make. A lot of times they'll give you an example or several different examples, and they'll say, here's an example landing page, or here's an example blog page if you have a blog. And then we also looked at the framework's extensibility. Can you build on top of the framework? Can you customize the framework? Again, these are some examples that we looked at where we're calculating the total functionality of the framework based on the framework's attributes, which we have here listed to the left. So without much further ado, we're going to look at our top 5 choices. Before we do that, we want to make some honorable mentions. We're not going to be talking about these frameworks, but we felt like they at least should be mentioned before we moved on. First, we wanted to note that Suzy is not going to be in our top 5, although it would be. It did not qualify because we're looking only at the full front-end frameworks, that's JavaScript and CSS. Suzy did not qualify. UIKit, absolutely a consideration. We didn't put it in our top 5, but we feel that it is a good framework. And Gumby, the Gumby framework is a good framework. Unfortunately, it's no longer maintained. It's no longer being developed. And for that reason, it did not make our top 5. Otherwise, why don't we take a look at the frameworks that did make our top 5. And coming in at number 5 is Blaze CSS. Blaze is an excellent framework that's very small in size. It's only 9 kilobytes. It offers you the responsiveness, modularity, and custom builds. It's completely open source. Now, some of the components that they have that are standard right on the templates, they'll have the login, dashboard, editor, many different options to choose. The approach that they take in making their website is very minimalistic. Also, the framework itself is very simple, easy to work with. It won't override any of your styles. You have to explicitly tell Blaze when you want to use Blaze components. It's a very good option for beginners because it's very easy to use, and also if you've been developing for a while, there's no reason you wouldn't want to use Blaze. It's a very well-rounded framework in my opinion. Number 4, we have Materialize. Based on Google's Material Design, Materialize was created by a group of Carnegie Mellon college students, and they have some excellent documentation here which explains everything in detail. The templates that they give you to start out are a starter template and this parallax template with a fixed background images. Now, they're very simple. You just download them, open them up, open the index.html in your favorite browser, and you have this template right here, or the starter template, and it's very easy to work with. So right off the bat, they're giving you a lot of different functionality for your site with no effort on your part at all. They have a full list of components that you can make, JavaScript and CSS. A lot of third-party options. If you're using Ruby, there's a gem, so you can incorporate this with Rails. You can incorporate this. You could build with Sass. It's exquisitely crafted, in my opinion. I've never used it in a project, but I would absolutely consider using it. I think it's a great front-end framework. Coming in at number 3, Semantic UI. Now, Semantic is a extremely robust framework. It lost points in the documentation. It is not so intuitive. They do some things differently. Instead of using the standard 12 column grid, they use a 18 column grid. There's some other different subtle differences. Installing, for example, wasn't as straightforward as some of the other frameworks. The framework itself is one of my favorites. It did take a little bit of a learning curve to get used to. Now that I'm comfortable using it, and after spending a lot of time reading the documentation and struggling and being frustrated, now I feel comfortable using it and taking advantage of the framework. It has a lot to offer. That being said, I wouldn't say it's very beginner friendly, but I would say that it's a very powerful, feature-rich framework. And I would say that it absolutely deserves consideration. Coming in at number 2, we have the Bootstrap framework, most popular framework, coming in at number 2. Now, this is one that's going to, of course, upset many people. Bootstrap is generally the number 1 rated framework. Unfortunately, we could not rate it number 1 based on our calculations. There's a lot of different reasons. It was very close, but Foundation ended up winning out just based on the simple, criteria that we went over, the size of the framework and the functionality that it offers. It's a fantastic framework that's being developed rapidly, and they have a lot to offer. And then when you check out Foundation, it has everything that Bootstrap has, and then just a little bit more. So that's the reason that we ended up going with Foundation. The numbers were just there. And if you see here the Jumbotron, you see a lot of websites using this particular setup here. A lot of copy and pasting that you see. Just looking at the dashboard here and comparing it even to the dashboard of the Blaze Foundation that we used, I would say Blaze has a nicer dashboard. But this is the most popular framework, and for good reason. Bootstrap's an excellent framework. There's more Bootstrap downloads every month than any other framework, and like I said, that's for good reason. It's a very well developed and well documented framework. Coming in at number 1, Zerb Foundation. And while they can't say that they're the most popular framework, they do say that they are the most advanced, which is for good reason. They are in their 6th version. They have components and styling for websites and for emails. I believe up until recently they also had apps as an option too. It looks like they took that off. But I've been looking at Foundation for a while now, and one of the things that really impressed me was the documentation. So if we take a look at some of the documentation, you'll notice, similar to Bootstrap, they have a ton of different components on the navigation. Now, Bootstrap's navigation's on the right, Foundation's navigation's on the left. Otherwise, they have a number of different components, and everything is laid out in very well documented fashion. The only differences that you might notice are Foundation's website looks a little bit more colorful. So aside from having excellent documentation, You'll be interested in maybe the tutorials or the classes or the training that they have. One thing that's interesting is they have these building blocks here. I believe these are user submitted, and the building blocks are neat. Bootstrap has some similar options as well, where you can kind of click on them and use some of their content, and they have it here, header with a sub nav. You can click on that and it'll show you the building blocks, and you'll get the HTML, CSS. You have the SCSS there for the SAS, and you can go through the building blocks and you can check out all these different things. One thing that I really like is they have the quips, which are interesting. So they'll say about 53% of emails are opened on mobile devices. It's just a little bit extra that they do. They go the extra mile, and that reminds me of how I like to do business, is going the extra mile, giving 110%, under promising and over delivering. And their style kind of aligns with my style, or what I believe to be my style, and that's why I really like Foundation. One of the things that impressed me most when I first discovered Foundation is the showcase. Now, if you're going to the Foundation showcase, you'll notice that they have some websites where Foundation is used, Lamborghini being one of them, Sonos. There's some big names here. More important than the big names, after I started checking out some of these websites, I noticed that these websites are so well made. They're so carefully crafted. They're some of the best websites that I've seen, frankly. And when I saw these, I thought, I need to figure out how these guys are building their sites. I need to figure out what they know and what I'm lacking so that I can build sites that look like this. I want to be able to deliver to my customers and clients the same quality sites that they're delivering. And they must know something that I don't know, because every single one of their sites looks amazing. It's very rare that you come across a site that has so much design and fluidity built in. It is really beautiful. Things like these shapes here, the shape of this image. I don't even know what that is. A parallelogram, a rhombus, I'm not sure. I never see images like that. That's awesome. To be able to manipulate things in such a way where these images can form different shapes, and that can kind of design the layout of the page. It's the way that they use space. They are just phenomenal at crafting websites, and I want to be that good. And I know that if I want to be that good, I got to figure out what they're doing, so I could learn from it, so I could take the things that I think they do well and I can copy them, and so I can figure out the things that I think that they don't do so well, and I can improve on them. And that's what you want to do. You want to find a framework that works for you. Maybe it's Zerb, maybe it's not Zerb, maybe it's Bootstrap, maybe it's Blaze, maybe it's pure CSS. Whatever framework works for you, you want to find that out. Figure out what they do really, really well. You copy that. You do that really, really well. Figure out what they can improve on. Figure out what they don't do so well. What is lacking, and make it better. And that's how you improve. You never improve unless you're competing with the best. If you're playing sports or you're playing chess, if you want to get better at playing chess, play people that are better than you. If you play people that you can beat, and you beat people all the time, you might think that you're really good. But the fact of the matter is, you're not improving. The way to improve, the way to get better, is to find someone better than you and play them. Lose to them. And it's okay to lose, because you learn from that, and that's how you get better. You got to figure out what they know. So hopefully after this, you guys will check out some of the foundation, some of the frameworks that we suggested. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section or get a hold of us through email. We'll have a follow-up video to this. I'd like to see some of the frameworks that you guys choose, if you end up choosing one of these and using them, and why. And if you have a framework that is not in our top 5, that's your number 1, let us know what that is and why you chose it. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.